Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Roll call. Everyone's here. Attest to publication.
I saw it at the bank.
Thank you, Joni. Approval of the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion made by Shelley, seconded by Joni to approve the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. We have tonight a presentation by the Baird Company on possible operating referendums for the 2022-2025 school year. Debbie Burnett is with us from Baird. Welcome, Deb.
Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you for joining us. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Dave, did you want to set the stage for my presentation or would you like me to dive right in?
I'll set the stage because you're a star, so the stage should be set for you, Debbie. As you know, Debbie has worked with us the last few referendums presenting. And so in terms of the model and that Debbie will go through, Debbie and Angie and I met a couple times going through the model and talking about not only the presentation, but forecasting the model out. So Debbie will give out, some information on it. And then obviously after she's done presenting, we hope there's a lot of questions and discussion between Debbie, Angie, who's zooming in, and myself. So you have the best information possible to go forward after tonight. So Debbie, again, welcome to Bangor and thank you for presenting.
Thank you. And Dave and Angie really are the brains behind much of what you see tonight. And so I just get the privilege of sharing a lot of it with you. So Brian Brewer and I are your Bangor team. Brian does say hello. I talked with him just before the call. And for those of you who have been on the board for some time, you know that we always look forward to coming to see you and present with you, this time virtually. So tonight, oops, I wonder why you weren't seeing the slides. There we go. So bringing us to where we are tonight, and I know you've done a lot of you've had a lot of conversation around this, but just to make sure we're all walking through the same page, I'll talk more about a lot of these concepts as we work through the presentation as well. But just remember that the state revenue limit formula controls much of what districts have to spend for their operational budgets. And when we say operational budgets, that's our transportation, our utilities, our salaries, our benefits. So what the district needs in order to run and provide that quality education for the students of which you're proud. And I'll show you this again later in the presentation, but Bangor has relied on non-recurring operational referendums to support this programming. The dollars provided by default through the revenue limit formula do not provide sufficient funds for you to operate, which is very much like other districts across the state. So your taxpayers have approved an operational referendum to provide more funds on a non-recurring basis, meaning that the funds expire after a period of time. Why we're coming tonight is that the current referendum is expiring and the district is looking to replace that referendum on the April 2021 ballot. And what that means is that the board needs to certify or approve that referendum in January. And I believe you're doing that next week. You'll determine or approve the type, the amount, and the duration of that referendum. And then your bond counsel, Quarles and Brady, they will help ensure all your legal requirements and timelines are met. They'll help draft the question. And I know that Angie and Dave have already been in contact with them, so you're in their queue. So where I fit in tonight is more of that Finance 101. So creating the background behind the why, and then sharing with you some scenarios that Dave, Angie, and I have run to help get you to that answer of how much, what kind, and how long. So please stop me as I work through if you have any questions or want me to pause on any element. If this was in person, it would be much more interactive, I know. So let's just start by reviewing revenue limits. They started back in 1993. The goal at the time was actually to control the tax levy. They created this formula that determined how much revenue a district could have to operate. They then provided state aid, and what was left over was for the taxpayer. They knew that the formula wouldn't always provide enough to operate. So within the language of the revenue limit calculation, they provided the ability to go to operational referendum if districts needed more funds. So this is a new slide. This one is a new slide to you. A lot of people ask, well, did the revenue limits accomplish what they intended at the time? And if we're looking purely at the tax rates, at the mill rates, and this is for Bangor specifically, the answer is yes. Back when revenue limits were put into place, the school's mill rate was about $17.72 per $1,000 of equalized value. And this year it was $9.74. So from a tax standpoint, the revenue limit did for the state and for Bangor what it was intended to do. What happened within that is, you'll remember back a couple of slides ago, when I talked about the revenue limit formula, I talked about how it controls how much you have to operate. So what it also did when it controlled the levy was it also put controls on spending. And so now I'm getting us a little bit more recent in data. This is only from 05 to this year. And you can see how the revenue limit in 2021, and this doesn't include your operational referendum, I'll layer that in a moment, but you'll see that the dollars that you have to spend through this revenue limit formula in 2021 isn't much more than it was back in 2011. So while it is controlling the tax levy, it's also greatly dampening what the increases that districts have to spend on operations on things that naturally increase, such as salary and benefits and utilities and supplies and such. Even if we layer in your operational referendum, you can see that that still primarily holds true. Your operational referendum has really been that bridge to get you beyond that 2011 mark. So why do we talk about revenue limits? Why are they important? And the answer is that a majority of your budget is comprised of this revenue limit revenue. And this is true for districts statewide. This revenue limit revenue is extremely important. It comprises most of what you have to spend. And so as it goes up and down, it impacts the amount that you have to spend on programming. So what you have done over time, as the state portion, this revenue limit portion, isn't enough to operate, you've gone to referendum. You've asked the community if they would support additional levy in order to support the operations of your school. And for those of you who have been on the board for some time, you've watched all of these happen. We describe your situation specifically. You go for non-recurring referendums, meaning they have a sunset, but I term it as a recurring non-recurring. So when that non-recurring referendum retires, because the state hasn't made any changes to the way the formula works, the need is still there. And therefore you go back to the community and ask for the authority to continue, specifying again how much this time. So that's where we are tonight. Your operational referendum is scheduled, your current one is scheduled to retire at the end of the 21-22 school year. If nothing happens, that authority goes away and you return back to that base, that revenue limit with no exemptions. And based on all of our forecasts we've run, that would result in great reductions needed throughout the district. And so that's what brings us to tonight, is saying, okay, the referendum is scheduled to retire. We know we need to replace it. Now, let's talk about how much, what kind, and how long. Am I explaining this okay so far?
Yes.
Okay, good. So let's dive into some of these scenarios. We're about to see a bunch of numbers, and I'll pause for a second. How visible is this for you on your screen? Is it big enough where you can actually read the numbers?
Yes, it's good, Debbie.
Oh, good, good. Okay, so just like we have in years past, Angie, Dave, and I have run some scenarios. And again, it's mostly Dave and Angie. I'm the one sharing it with you. But they've pulled up their Baird model and they've gone in and put in some base assumptions. And we're going to talk about some of them, and I'll walk you through some of the scenarios. But I've highlighted the 3 key areas most districts explore when they look at replacing a referendum. The first is a surplus deficit, and that's our first pink highlighted row. The next is the estimated mill rate. And then the final is the actual operational referendum, your non-recurring amount. So this here you can see that the 900,000 is retiring. You can see that the year, so it's retiring here. The year after it retires, the district already sees a deficit, which is expected because that revenue is going away, and that the deficit increases slightly through natural growth of the expenses. Some of the assumptions that we've placed into your base model, we've assumed no new money from the state, stable student count, resident student count, and flat property value, all of which that Dave and Angie feel are conservative for our base. We also ran another scenario for you that might be more realistic to what you could expect. This also includes 2% salary, 8% health, and 5% dental. So it has factored in the salary and benefit estimates as well. So our base, as you can see, shows that need to replace the referendum. So then we ran a scenario, that shows the same referendum amount. So what happens, this last referendum was 800, 800, 900. What happens if we did another one, 800, 800, 900? And the conversation that we had during that call was, while that set of numbers has worked it worked last time, the last 2 times, I believe, that based on the current projections, that might not work this time around. So we ran another scenario that continued the 900,000. The 900,000 that you have in 21, 22, the last year of your old referendum, would carry into the future years. You can see that there still might be a slight deficit, assuming no new money from the state and such, but Angie and Dave, you can add to this too, but they felt that this was more manageable, especially in the first couple of years, should that not hold true. So then, just to check our work, we ran another scenario and we said, okay, this is still showing deficits even in the first year, but specifically in the second. What happens if our estimates are a little conservative? What happens if we do grow in FTE and the state does give us some money in the next biennial budgets? They allow us to increase our per pupil amount on the revenue limit. And you can see that 900,000 then provides just enough to maintain that balanced budget that most districts strive to achieve. Even with this scenario and the additional revenue coming from the state, you can see that the mill rate is at or around, projected to be, again, this can always change. It's kind of, we use the visual like the weather. The further you go out, the more things that can change until you get there, but we model it and base it on our best assumptions to date. So even with that, knowing that, the mill rate is still projected to be at, around, or below the level that you're currently paying in 2021. Oh, I think I accidentally hit back. I apologize. I got us back to this slide, which shows those mill rates as well. That's what I was actually expecting to see. So tonight's goal is to have some conversation around what I just shared, and I'll come back to that output when the conversation starts. But I just want to close the loop on some statutory things, make sure we're all on the same page with that before we come back to the conversation aspect. We like to come back to the reminder of the state statutes when it comes to referendum, because if you've been on the board for some time, you'll remember that going in April isn't necessarily in the typical cycle you would normally go. Normally you would have gone next year instead, just because you have another year on your referendum. But in time, the statutes have changed regarding referendum. And so the new referendum, this part doesn't apply to you, but you can't do more than 2 referendum questions per calendar year. That said a different way, you can do 2 referendum questions per calendar year. But the one that's impactful to you is you can only do those elections on regularly scheduled spring or fall election days. And this is what's causing you to need to go to referendum in April of 21, rather than that special election or picking up the primary. It's not certain there will be an election then, and having that second opportunity if you need it. And then what's really important when you do decide to go is that the resolution needs to be approved 70 days prior to the election date. And that's what brings us into this January timeframe for the approval. So by January 26th, to pursue referendum, you'll have this conversation determining the type, duration, and amount. It won't be approved tonight, I don't believe. The meeting is scheduled next week to approve. And once determined and the question approved, bond counsel again will help you dot all your I's and cross all your T's. And that's where Angie's diligent in following up with that and does a great job too. So with that, I'll pause and ask if there are any questions. And then after the questions, we'll come back to that output for the conversation part. Can I explain anything further?
Debbie, this is Paul Winch. I have one question, and I think I know the answer, but on the third scenario, you gave us a scenario with increasing FTE and per pupil monies. The one scenario or the one input we haven't done in a scenario is assuming a 0% growth in valuation. And that historically, I mean, it's a good thing to be conservative on that, but realistically 0% is hyper conservative. I guess it's not so much a question as I'm just pointing that out to my fellow board members, and maybe you know that, I'm sorry if you do, but that's something we all need to consider here, that 0% growth over those 3 years is a very, very conservative figure. So, but there's not a scenario here to show any kind of output with that. Just more of a comment, I guess, than a question.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you brought that up as a comment, because the the property value growth will only impact the mill rate and the levy, but we've highlighted the mill rate here. So and I know you know this, but as you talk with stakeholders, and we can plug in property value growth, what it will do is likely it will decrease your mill rate projection and make it look even better while still keeping the surplus deficit the same. So we felt that this provided, it was still the mill rate still looked favorable compared to what you were paying this year. And then provided, again, some being conservative in the years out. Dave, did I explain that okay?
Yeah, you did, Debbie. And to Paul's point, over the last 3 years, our property values have generally somewhere between 5 and 6% over the last 3 years. And again, I could look up the exact numbers, but to Paul's point, yeah, that it's very, very conservative to say 0. So, and Debbie, as you said, that has an impact if we put that in the model on the mill rate itself. Correct?
Got it. Yep. Any
Debbie,
questions?
yeah, a question I have is, the uncertainty on what, the state will be giving and things of that sort going forward. In past years, in years where inflation starts to take off dramatically, and I'm talking more of a hyperinflation type of scenario, how does that generally reflect on state aid and things coming back to school districts?
Mhm. Good question. So it's been extremely volatile in the last 10 to 15 years. So whereas when revenue limits first came into play, we could give a consistent answer and say, in statutes, it was the CPI increase you would receive. That hasn't held true in the last several biennial budgets. So what would happen, whatever increase that would be applied would go into your model. And if, let's say, it was greater than 50 or 100, then your surplus in this scenario that you're seeing right here would likely go up. And then the district would have the ability to address some outstanding projects, which there's always a really long list for. They would have the ability to put it into Fund 46 and prepare for future needs such as roofs or parking lots. Or the district could choose to levy less than what's approved. Those are the most common results. I think, just speaking off the cuff, if I can for a second, I think the likelihood of a lot more than $50 in the next couple of years, I don't think is as likely. It would be in the outlying years that you may get more.
I guess to piggyback off of that, and I suppose jump ahead, I'm not sure if we're there yet, but talking about the number of years to run a referendum, how does the springtime for what's going to be a primary, is there a year we need to stay away from? Is it better to go a 2-year instead of a 3-year? Is 25 going to be a primary offered, or are we going to be in the same situation we are now?
Good question. So the reason why we stuck with 3 initially is that it has been your pattern, and you're right, you don't have to do 3. If you do 2, I think you're going to feel like you're coming back to it right away. And I should have gone out further in the cycle, but there are pros and cons to both sets of cycles. So yes, to answer your question directly, if you did a 3-year, you would be coming into your planning wanting to go to referendum in 1, 2, 3 in either 23, 24 late, like the spring, like we're doing, especially if you want that second chance.
So there would be no primary in 25 to run the approval like we have in the past. So we'd have to run it a year early like we're doing now.
Mhm. And there could be a primary, there's just no guarantee.
Right, exactly.
That's the sticking point this year.
So
And
yeah, I guess-
Seeing those emails come out from municipalities saying, yes, we are having one, or no, we aren't. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
I guess just with the, everything the way it is now and, inflation more than likely will happen. If we run this thing out to a 3rd year, we've got a lot of questions. Is 9 gonna cover it or not? And then we're running into repeating a referendum when there very possibly is not going to be a primary. So is it in our best interest to go 3 years or just stay 2 this time around? I know it's not what we've done in the past. It would be coming back to it again. But thinking financially stable, what is really our best option to do?
What about going the other way? What about going 4 rather than 3? Because what we're trying to do is get off the cycle, if you will.
Right, yep,
Right.
to go
And-
4 other than 3.
And we know the arguments about, like
And
you
we're
said, the
just-
weather, and you can't predict too
Right.
far out, but that's another scenario.
Right, we're just a lot further out into the unknowns that way.
Mhm. Well, and let me come back to that. There is an April next, there is an April election in odd years.
But not next year.
Next year, there's an April election as well. You're capitalizing on, or going this year provides you the opportunity that if it doesn't pass, you have that second opportunity.
Because there's no November election.
Exactly. That's the cycle that you are on right now. And
Okay, right. Normally we go in the fall on the November. So yes, in 25 then. 24.
24, there will be.
24
There
there
will
will
be
be.
a.
Sure.
yes,
November.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
All right.
Like, the 3 years should get you back on track to having that November. Sorry, I got lost in the conversation for a second. I
Right,
apologize.
because it would be in 24 that we would plan for 25.
Right, right. Okay, my bad.
No, it's.
My fault. I reinforced it.
So far ahead, it's hard.
Debbie, this is Tina Matheson. And so we're talking a little bit of predicting into the future and what is a good number. And what I think is really important for our general public to understand is that even if you go with your last scenario, the mill rate's still lower and it's less than what we're currently at for the price, even though we would be bringing more income in. But so if you estimate this, and even if we are conservative, what happens if that money is not correct? What happens if we underestimate at that point? We're going to have to make cuts until our next referendum. And so then we're just having to plan. And I think we kind of need to keep in mind that we'll have a new superintendent at that point too, that will need to be able to project the amount of time too. So maybe just speaking out loud, but for our general public to understand that we're not asking for additional money than what we're currently getting right now. It looks like it, but our mill rate would stay consistent. And then planning wise is typically though, across the board, what we've seen is 3 years or it's a non-recurring pretty much across the state, correct?
Non-recurring is much more prevalent. The years will vary. 3 is very common though.
Okay.
Debbie, and, if I can just add, to Tina's point, that, the choices that you might have to make, so as she said, if it's not enough in that second or third year, a couple options that you would have as a district is obviously to look at your budget and see where um, cuts can be made within the budget. You also, even though I don't advocate for this as a thing to do continually, we do have a healthy fund balance. So if you needed to 1 year dip into it to help balance the budget, you certainly can do that because right now our fund balance is around 16% and DPI recommends 10 to 15%. Again, we've been fortunate that we've been able to add to it, but if it happened to be a tight year in that the biennium budgets, let's say that they didn't give any type of increase, again, the options would be looking at the budget, making some cuts, hopefully cuts that don't directly affect students or using part of your fund balance. So.
Dave, I guess I have a question regarding the pupil counts that you used. Just based on the 2 new subdivisions and everything in town, do you think that's a conservative number, or do you think we could potentially have more kids from that? I guess, I don't know what you guys know about, people moving into the district, that kind of thing, because I think that also comes into play with, where are we going to put all these kids to? And that could affect us as well.
Yeah, again, Lori, what we did is went very conservative. So the first scenarios that Debbie showed, we held our enrollment flat. And then in the last scenario where she talked about FTEs, which means full-time equivalency, again, the model allows you to do certain variables. So what we did is, again, and I think this is conservative, again, based on, what we're seeing in the building in our community and everything. So what we did each year is add 5 students. And so by doing that, that FTEs and the per pupil, which is a biennium budget, have a huge impact on narrowing that gap between revenues and expenditures. So when we ran, those FTEs and did the increases, it makes a difference in terms of what you're forecasting out. So Debbie or Angie, do you want to add to that? If I didn't explain that quite correctly, or.
I thought that was an excellent explanation. And so to come back to, if there's growth, let's say the increase is greater than that, then in this case, the surplus could possibly be higher. And then we would come back to some of those options I described earlier with utilizing those dollars to the best benefit of the students and families in the district. But saying that as well, this scenario also shows an increase in the funds that the state provides, the per pupil increase, we call it. And so let's say that the state doesn't provide as much of an increase, but you do see more growth. Those two could help offset one another to bring you back to this amount, a similar amount too. I think what was important between these two scenarios was what seems to be a more conservative estimate, most conservative estimate, based on the assumptions that Dave and Angie know right now, and then compared to a hopefully still conservative but better output. And this doesn't have to be the answer. This was a great starting point for the conversation tonight.
And Debbie, conversely, when Tina asked about, okay, if we have a budget shortfall. And so on the other hand, if things would be better than we anticipate, and I'm saying from a standpoint of per pupil increase, and our FTEs are more than, we had put in here, again, you can levy up to the amount, but you can also under levy if you don't need that money. And I know there was a question about under levying. Now, over the last few years, we have levied to the max, but back in 2013, 14, and 11, 12, and 10, 11, we did under levy. So if things are, if you're optimist and things, and I'm certainly an optimist in terms of what's happening in our community in terms of building and bringing students in the reputation of our district, bringing kids in. I think that's optimistic. Now, biennium budget, I would probably not be as optimistic, but again, if things turn out in a positive nature, you can also under levy. So.
Any other questions, discussion, conversation?
When we look at the scenarios, I mean, the first couple in red, that just alarms me right off the bat. So I just keep going to the last one, the last scenario. Mainly because if you look at it as a tax base paying, I mean, the amount is pretty similar. Can you explain the mill rate though, how that is going to change if it goes lower with more growth, or it changes? How's the variable there? Just so, I just want people, when it comes to to voting time, that it's really, it doesn't seem to me like that first 2 years is asking for more, but what we're paying is actually less.
So the first 2 years, you're asking for more than you did the first 2 years of your last referendum, but you'll be continuing the amount in the last year of this one. So the current referendum you have in place, the last year is 21-22, and it's 900,000. And so the district is asking to continue, in this scenario, is asking to continue the 900,000 for 3 more years. And so what that 900,000 is added to the revenue limit formula, and it gets factored in with the other variables in the district, but in the revenue limit formula specifically, how we started. From that, the state aid is reduced, and what's left over is the local levy. That levy is divided by your property value in the district and then multiplied by 1,000 to get to your mill rate. And so the reason why that, unfortunately, the revenue limit, because the variables that play into it, it's not clean. Like if it was, you would see exactly 10, 12 the next year, right? And you don't. So from a dollar standpoint, you'd be asking to levy via the operations the same amount year over year. It would flow into the formula just as it has all the other years. But the true impact to the taxpayer would be right based on their equalized value at the time and this estimated mill rate. And I don't think I just explained that very well. I think I was trying to dive in too far. But the estimated impact to the taxpayer at this point in time would show that they're based on 0% property value growth and the other assumptions in the model, that even though you'd be maintaining the 900,000, that the mill rate per $1,000 of equalized value could still go down compared to 21, 22, for example.
The likelihood that the mill rate will go down is pretty high, just because of the fact, I mean, the village or the township may not reevaluate, but the fact that these houses are being built, even if they're all retirees and no kids come into the district, those values are gonna be there. So obviously, they're not building, 100 new houses, but every house is gonna add to that value, even if there's no students.
Yep.
So that part should be a benefit to the district and the mill rate.
Yep. More wealth to spread the levy over. Mhm. And I know the decision for the referendum is more of an internal conversation within you and the board. But are there any other questions for me?
Yeah, Debbie, this is Jack Liga. So I have a question about the amount and compared to our budget and in the state, what is, I'm sure there are districts that don't have a 10% operating referendum. This is over 10% of our budget, correct? Is that pretty typical in the state when they go to operating referendum?
Oh, I have a slide on that. You are not the only one. Shoot. Let me think where I can find it. Give me a second. If you want to talk, give me a second and I'll find it and I'll share with you others who are in that similar boat. I should have thought to pull it in. Here we go. So this was back from 1920. Let me just move this out of the way. But as of 1920, there were 103 districts that had at least 10% of the revenue limit, supplemented by non-recurring, so the specific kind of referendum you have. And there are 421 districts in the state. So about a quarter of the districts in the state are in a similar position to you. Isn't that staggering?
Mhm.
And Debbie, is it fair to say that Act 10 exacerbated, the use of referendums? Because if you remember, Act 10 took it at a certain level, and because even in our district, before Act 10, the amount we were aided on was in the 70s, 70 some percent. And once Act 10 hit, we went back down into the 60s, and I think that was typical of a lot of districts.
Yeah, this graph is a visual that represents what you just said, Dave. You can see the 11 bar, the drop from the 10-11 bar to the 11-12 bar. And the slow increase. So since Act 10, the dollars added to increases provided to schools have stopped some years and slowed, which has made it difficult for districts to manage their budgets without the continued need or the new need for operational referendum. So you just surpassed in terms of revenue limit authority, which is that 80%-ish that we had on the next slide. You just surpassed your 2018 amount. Sorry, the 2011 amount you just surpassed in 2018 from a revenue limit standpoint.
Hmm.
So was this information helpful in guiding your discussion and decision?
I think it was extremely helpful. Thank you for the information and the breakdowns. Seeing it visually is so much better.
Okay.
Any other questions for Debbie? Can she sign on? Does she want to stay on?
Debbie, would it be okay to stay on even during our discussion? Because again, your expertise is very helpful. Even though obviously it's now, board decision and everything. So would it be okay for you to stay on?
Absolutely. I'll just mute and I'll unmute if you need me.
Thank you, Debbie. Just in case in our discussion, if we would have a question. Thank you.
Sounds great. Do you want me to leave the slide up for your conversation or would you like me to stop that sharing?
We have a paper copy.
Okay, cool.
But if
Oh.
people are watching, do we want to leave it on? Yeah, I think if you could bring it back up, Debbie, that would be great. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Can you see it okay now?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Good, you're welcome.
Okay, next steps.
So basically, Julie, what I'm looking for, as I said in the narrative, is some direction from the board in terms of drafting the resolution paperwork, which the official vote on the resolution will be done at next week's meeting if you choose to go ahead. So tonight, again, was informational, and then to give me direction on, so I can go to Quarles and Brady, who is our bond counsel, and have them draft the paperwork. Now, again, doesn't mean that if next week it's you decide not to go ahead with it, it doesn't require you by your action tonight to go ahead and vote on the referendum next.
So type, duration, amount, and date.
Yep. So that's what I will need to when I talk to Quarles and Brady's to to have them draft all of the paperwork for it, so. So again, our recommendation, Angie and I have talked about this quite a bit, and obviously talked a lot with Debbie on this. So our recommendation is 900,000 for 3 years, and to hold the election, the vote on the referendum in April 6th. The reason for that April 6th vote, if you choose to do that, is if the referendum wasn't successful, you could turn around and run it again either next February during the primary or the general election next April in 2022. So
And
that
of
is our
cour-
recommendation.
And non-recurring, of
It-
course,
and
non-recurring.
Thank you, Julie. Yes, non-recurring, which means it is a sunset, a beginning and an end to it. In this case, it'd be 2022 through 2025.
Well, I definitely think the 3-year term is, I mean, I think that's a definite. The non-recurring is a definite.
I think not doing it in April and giving ourselves that second chance is reckless, honestly. I think we need to take advantage of the timing. I know it's sooner than we normally would do it, but I think we'd be careless to not take advantage of that opportunity. That's just my 2 cents.
Any other thoughts about that?
I like the planning aspect of it. I think to know what we have coming in the future, and I think that with a new superintendent coming in and knowing what they have to look forward to is helpful.
Good point. So it looks like non-recurring 3 years, April 6th, 2021. So what we have left is the amount for each year.
And
And
per-
right now, recommendations are 900 for each year, 900,000 for each year.
Yes, Julie. And again, going through the budget, through the model, we believe that through a combination of, obviously, we hope that the FTEs, full-time equivalency, those will help us out, and hopefully a little bit of help from the state biennium budget. But we feel that between managing the budget, which obviously that will be the new superintendent and Angie's work to do that, that there is a flexibility to, drill down and to look at areas where if we need to make, tighten the budget, make some cuts, we would do that. And again, that second or third year, because we've been very frugal in terms of building a fund balance, if you had to, you could access that. Again, that's not something as a that you would recommend on a continual basis, and I'd really recommend against that. But districts do in certain years, if there's an unforeseen thing that happens, again, I use it for the example of a boiler, replacement of a boiler, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars, where that's probably not, obviously, that as it is in a budget, where you dip into fund balance. So again, if you had to, that especially that third year, you could do that.
I think the numbers being at 900, 900, 900 allow us to at least continue with, saving our programming for what we have today. And I think from the superintendent search information that we got, there's some things that our community would like us to do to, do more with our curriculum and that kind of thing. And I think if we choose option A or option B, I consider this one option C, but if we considered one of those first two, we're in the red right away, so there would be no adding programs, it would be taking programs away. So I think with what we see in the district right now and the positive things, if there's some little changes there. And again, we have been frugal. We don't always levy to the max. My opinion is to go with the 900,000 for 3 years. That's just my opinion.
I agree.
I agree with that as well, but just for the sake of discussion, we have a surplus deficit those first 2 years of more than 50,000, each of those first 2 years. Now, $50,000 is a lot of money any way you look at it, but in the big picture here, in our budget of 7 million or whatever the total would be, is that cutting it too close? I guess, Dave, that's a question. Did you and Angie consider that? If we've got a 70 and a $72,000 surplus in years 1 and 2, and we were to do just throwing it out there, 850, 859, is that just cutting it too close? Because like you said, a boiler and we're in the red, or a bus.
Yeah, Paul, I feel that, again, asking for the 909 over the first 2 years would give us more flexibility, or, Angie and the new superintendent, more flexibility in that. Again, we've been fortunate in terms of the budget to be able to do things that, again, I go back to, the renovation of the elementary library, the playground, those types of things that, again, you may have to look at probably the maintenance things or other things a little more closely. We've been fortunate that we've been able to do those things because of the way we've managed the budget. So, Paul, I feel more comfortable recommending the 900. Could we make it work with 850, 859? Yeah, we just have to make more choices, very honestly. So.
Okay, I'm not advocating for that. I just wanted to make sure we hashed it out thoroughly. So to Lori's point, no one asked us to do less in the future. They asked us to spend less, which of course, but no one has ever asked us to do less. So, all right, thank you.
Was that your question, Paul? Was going less or going more? Like, were you asking, is this enough money?
I was suggesting if we could cut it by 50,000 each of those first 2 years, which would offset those first
Okay.
2 years of deficit. If
All
we
right.
could go 850, 859, that saves
And
us $100,000 over 2 years, but at what cost? Pardon the pun, it's a risk.
I was just thinking the opposite, because in my time here, we've added classes and teachers, and that's like, that would just be some salary too. Like, if we add we don't have to add that much, and it adds up quickly. So that's why I was asking which way you were going on that.
The
Especially because we
option-
get this surplus, assuming, an increase in aid that we have no clue if it's really coming. So I don't think that, I wouldn't want to cut it any closer.
Yeah, I definitely get your question, Paul, and, yeah, it's definitely a discussion worth having. I would rather have the possibility of the money there and levy less and not take it than to not have it there and needing more. So great question, but yeah.
Yeah. Great point, Shelley. We can levy less. We do have that control, so.
So with that, is this going to be enough?
I don't like, to me, the number, the 1 million mark is,
Somebody had to say it.
yep, exactly. It's a number I hope we never have to get to.
But I think if it's a discussion, that's what we have
Yeah.
to decide. Like, I think
Right.
this is like, so far from what I've heard, is the middle ground of both. And really, it's keeping the mill rate at the same but still providing the same quality.
6 numbers
Right.
just sound so much more
But going to
community
referendum-
friendly.
Unless you don't
It's fair.
have a reason other than, oh, we don't know, how do you sell that to the public of
No,
basically?
I
give us-
like this example. I like this example for the fact that it's an operational account for what we have right now that we're seeing.
Right, and we can run a balanced budget on the 999. And so asking for more than that would be a hard sell.
I agree.
when you say that, the recommendation, and to Shelley's point, because we've ran numerous referendums here, I think we have to balance, providing obviously the funds necessary to, to run our school and everything, but we also have to be aware of what our community will support. And I'll be honest, I feel strongly that if we were to ask for that million, that would be a very, very tough sell in our community.
I think we do a very good job of being very careful with our dollars and stuff that way, but I'm sure there are plenty of people that would say we spend way over what we really should, that we can make more cuts, and, they don't give specifics where, but they say you should really cut less or spend less and things that way, so.
The devil's in the details, as we know. So then when you say, okay, give us a list, nobody wants to put that list together either, so.
Exactly.
I think we've been fiscally responsible in the past, and I think this is a fiscally responsible way to do it.
Okay. So are we in agreement, 900,000 for each year?
I'll make that motion to go on, if there's no more discussion, to go on non-recurring from 2022 to 2025 of 900, 900, 900 to be held on April 6th of 2021. I think it's the 6th.
Were we gonna act on it tonight, can we?
Oh,
It's
oh,
not
I'm
actionable
sorry.
on the agenda, I don't
No,
believe, it's
it's a-
discussion.
move
Well,
it.
this is just a recommendation.
This is
It's
the
not,
recommend-
we can't vote.
Correct.
That's
This is
right.
a
I forgot. I'm
recommendation
sorry,
for
Shelley.
the,
Yep.
for the,
Well, what Shelley stated is our recommendation.
Yes.
Recommendation to
Yeah.
put on the agenda for,
yes.
for next Wednesday's
And
meeting.
for the bond council paperwork, yes.
Yeah, we have to have the bond council paperwork,
Yeah.
Dave, correct, before
Yes.
we actually make a.
Yes, yes. So next Wednesday, you will have if you go ahead, with the actual resolution, and that's when you do the vote for. if
All
you-
right, thank you. Excellent discussion. Thank you, everybody. Okay, I ask to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion made by Lori, seconded by Paul. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.